Hi, my name is Steve Dunn. I'm the pastor at Farmville United Methodist, and it is my joy to be with two of my friends today. Sonny Limm, who is a pastor at Trinity United Methodist here in Kinston, who is playing host to us today. Thank you for allowing us to use your space. And Joseph Park, who is the pastor of Pine Valley United Methodist Church in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And I'm going to be talking with Sonny and Joseph and asking them a few questions in regards to the tragic murder, we should call it what it is, that took place a couple of weeks ago in Georgia, in which a young white male went out to various spas or parlors and murdered eight people, claiming that he was dealing with some sexual sin and temptation, and that he felt like he needed to remove that temptation. And since then, Sonny and Joseph and I, we serve on a Sound District Anti-Racism Task Force together, and we felt that it was important for us to take a moment to address these issues with you today. So thank you for your time. Sonny, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. My name is Sonny Limm, and I'm a pastor of this church, Trinity United Methodist Church in Kinston. And this is my first year of serving at this church.
And Joseph, help us get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. So my Korean name is Hyun Seok. That's my first name, and Park is my last name, but I go by Joseph for my congregation and my colleagues and people who will find, my first name is a little bit too difficult to pronounce. I see myself too, that immigrant pastor, and I was born and grew up in Korea, and got married and came to the United States.
So to get us started here today, I've been hearing the acronym AAPI quite a lot for the past couple of weeks. And that's not a term or an acronym that I have been familiar with. So either one of you, whoever wants to respond, can you tell us what AAPI means, and if it's a helpful part of your identity, if you feel like it's a term that you relate to, or just tell us more about what that means.
I myself had to study it because it's not a word that I'm familiar with. So I looked it up on Google, and it says Asian American and Pacific Islanders, if I'm not mistaken. And if that's an umbrella term that embraces different ethnicities and races, then if that works for others, then I don't have any problem with that. But since I believe that all classifying terms in terms of race is social construct.
The Asian American Pacific Islander, might be, as I hear from different places, a political terminology. As Christians, certainly we have our own answer to who am I, but still, not just as Christians, but in this society, in this culture, who am I? And it also makes people think about that. What is my identity? And identity that comes from your own family, your own background, your own race and ethnicity, food you eat, but also identity that people impose on you. So this is your identity, right? And I see my identity this way, but when people say you are this, you are that, then certainly that influences your brain, and it influences your thought process. And then as you grow, listening to that and hearing that, I believe it'll shape and form what you believe who you are, and whether you are part of this or not. For children and those who are born and growing up here, how would they see themselves in terms of their own identity, and how others are seeing them of their identity, and how all those things you hear from one another and from the media and from politicians will affect the formation of your own, identity. Might be something I think people can think about and probe more.
And we were talking before we came in. You and I were, Joseph. just about sort of about what we're talking about right now, grouping all Asians and Asian Americans into under one umbrella when Asia is itself by far the most populous continent in the world, and is made up of many subcultures and races and ethnicities itself. So it's worth noting as we continue forward that Asia is an incredibly diverse and populous part of the world, and then of course, we're addressing this as incidents that happen in the United States, and that there's an Asian diaspora throughout the world. We can't speak for everyone. Both Sonny and Joseph are of Korean descent, so that does not speak for everyone, and we are also going to be, as we move forward, addressing specifically violence against women, and here we are a group of three men. And so it's important, I think, for us to acknowledge our limitations here as well.
But I'm just here to share as a minority my perspective and how I feel about the whole situation that is going on now and the increasing number of hate crimes. Even though I was born in the United States, I grew up in South Korea, so I feel like I am a foreigner to America. But whenever I think about brothers and sisters who are a second generation of immigration, so like from different countries, not only Asia, but grew up in the United States, and constantly because of their different color of skin and different appearances, somehow the society tends to not treat them as their own people, fellow citizens or fellow residents, but strangers, foreigners. But the pain comes in when you consider where you live is your home, and you are not treated as someone who finds home in the same land. So I think that's one of the major issues of racism that hurts many people.
Which leads right into the next question that I wanted to ask. You already, Sonny, I think, started to answer this question, but I wondered how you might define racism, and if you would be willing to share perhaps some of the ways that you've experienced that in your own life, ministry, anything.
For that question, maybe I can go first. Yeah, I was thinking, pondering on your question, what is racism? Certainly you are not looking for a dictionary answer, right? I come to see that racism is a struggle of a race or of a person to secure one's value by diminishing the value of other people based upon their race. So I get to see that, this is certainly, because of that, it's part of sin. Because one is promoting one's own value only by diminishing and lowering the value of other people based on their skin color. And that comes from certainly one's own insecurity, because you are insecure of your own identity, because you feel somehow challenged and then unstable with your own value, and that comes out in a way to be secured, but not to figuring out the truth about yourself, but more about diminishing and stepping down, the value of other people. But that comes on the line of actually identifying people's races as a tool and means to do it.
Well, how I see racism is, I think it is really a spiritual matter, because like Joseph mentioned, it is about how you perceive yourself, how you find your value in yourself, and I think people in general, we feel just insecure about about ourselves and about our lives, and it is easy to have something to blame on, or to have something very visible and you can touch, and you just simply regard them as your enemies and attack them as if it will solve your life problems. And that's a spiritual matter, I think. Unless we find our self-value and our security in Christ, then we would find, we will pursue and seek those things in somewhere else, and it is usually done in evil way.
For Sonny, one thing you said a moment ago that really struck me, and I think that people like me who are white and are part of the dominant culture in the area in which we live. One thing I think we need to hear and always be remembering is that you said that it always feels like, even though you were born here and you're an American citizen, it always feels like you are other, like like there's not really a place that's really home. Then that was very striking to me. I think that's one thing that I need to always be mindful of for myself.
Well, thank you for mentioning it, because I was actually thinking about the same thing. I'm thinking about what I have just said. Okay, well, it is true. Somehow I feel like I regard myself as a stranger or foreigner to the country where I live more than a decade. Both of my kids were born in this nation and they will live here, and it is highly likely that I will spend my whole life here. But somehow I regard myself still as a stranger, and take it for granted whenever people treat me as a foreigner and a stranger. And as I was mentioning it, and you also bring that up, and it just struck me as well to think this way. And now that I realize it is the air of racism that I'm breathing in. So yeah, I hope my kids don't feel that way as they grew up here and as an American citizen.
I think I have to admit that I've been living in the United States more like encapsulated in a safety zone. As a pastor, and after coming into ministry, even in the seminary, there was very, I think, safe environment. So there might be some, odd case here and there, but in general, school policies and seminary, good Christian friends, right? And in the ministry, loving congregation. First, I think I have to admit that I've been living, even in the United States, in a very encapsulated environment, opposed to, as you said, to those ladies working in the parlors and hair salon or nail salon, those places, working in the world. And maybe because of that, sometimes I'm more, I may sound very naive. Even my children may have gone through things that I have not gone through in the public school, but they sometimes cannot bring it up because of their age or immaturity in their intellect, or because of their young, little, right? Sometimes I'm really wondering what's really going on in the public school, what's really going on in the world, in the society. So yeah, I think there is something I have to work on in myself.
Joseph, I think you've started to address this a little already, but specifically since we are addressing the murders that took place in Georgia. Now, there are many who, including the sheriff of Cherokee County in Georgia, who we should note is a white man. There are many who are very quick to dismiss that race was any kind of a factor in this as well. And it's complicated because, as we noted, we could easily say that this was violence that targeted women. And it's complicated because 2 of the 8 victims also were white, were Caucasian as well. And so as we're thinking through these, all the social dynamics and how all of these things are at play together, I just wonder, what maybe would you say to anyone who would argue that race was not a factor?
I feel like there is injustice happening everywhere, that somehow people want to blind themselves to that reality. Like when we see, when we know the fact that the guy who murdered, he went to Asian massage shop first, and 6 out of 8 who were killed were Asian. Then, before giving him a benefit of doubt, I think we need to regard it, take it as it is, that it has, race plays big part somehow in this incident. I think, I cannot help but thinking about like a rape culture as well. Like when a tragedy is like raping happened, somehow people defending guys than the victims, and all the burden of proof is on the shoulders of victims. And I think that the same principle plays in racism too, and hate crimes too. When we see 6 out of 8 who were killed were Asian, and all of them were women. And it doesn't have to be either or, but it have to be both and. When people select victims, choose victims, they choose those whom they regard as lesser or weaker than themselves. So women have been easy targets, and I believe Asian have been easy targets too. And in the court, I heard it is really hard to prove intention of the criminals or suspects. So I learned that only 15% of the accusations have been proved to be true, and they are made guilty of hate crimes. And also accusing them for hate crimes is also not so high, because it is hard to prove the intention. But somehow, when the suspect says, well, I'm not motivated by racism, then it is just accepted as true. And somehow, there is a guy who killed 8 women, and 6 out of 8 are Asian. There is an officer who described him as a guy who had a bad day. But somehow, the officer, who was supposed to keep justice and peace and protect others who cannot protect themselves, somehow sympathize more with them than the victims. At least that's the impression that I got. And that is quite revealing. I don't think that's just him thinks that way. I believe there are many people who resist taking this case as hate crime, or at least race doesn't play any role in this incident. Somehow there is a resistance to accept racism's existence, or I don't know why. I cannot help but think racism plays a bigger role than they think. Even in ways they respond to the incident are quite racist. They might say, I'm being neutral, but when you describe killer who murdered 8 persons, just a guy who had a bad day, and when you take his word as it is, saying, well, he says he's not motivated by racism. Well, he's not racist. I mean, how can that be a neutral position? Just these portions are enough evidence for me to think, well, racism plays a significant role in every way, not only in the killer's mind, but also the mind of those who deny it.
Joseph, same question to you. What would you say to those who would look back at those events which took place and they would say that race had nothing to do with those events?
Right. Well, as Sonny said, I could not say for sure that, because I have not went into the brain of the murderers. I could not say how he was motivated, what was the reason that he went out and killed those people. So I think I cannot say for sure that it was, for me, at least for me, Asian targeted, racism-based crime or hate crime. I cannot say that for sure. But the problem is, as you said, Stephen, that after that, how Asian community is responding to it, right? And after that, how the public service man and the sheriff will respond to it. And after that, how, as you just asked a question, how other people might respond to that might be more concerning. Because as much as I don't know whether it is based on Asian targeted hate crime, I think people don't know either that it's certainly not of that either, right? So if a person would say this is not based on Asian, racism or hate, it's not a hate crime, I don't think they can really prove it, as much as I cannot prove either that it's a hate crime. Then the thing is, do we really want to know what was the reason and what is the truth? Rather than trying to understand and investigate, know the truth behind it, some people try to easily and quickly just shove it under the carpet. We really need to want to know the truth as much as possible. What is it truly? Do we really want to know that, or there's something behind it when people say no, it is not a hate crime, or when people say differently? And also, as Sonny said, we have to think about the victims. When Asian communities are coming out saying it is somehow motivated, we feel it that way, that it's motivated by racism. We feel that this is hate crime. Then, rather than trying to listen to the victims and try to sympathize and understand them, even though that may not be 100% true, right? And only trying to oppose the voices of the community of the victim, and then concern coming out from them. What is the motivation? What is the thought behind when people just easily deny and reject it? No, this is not a hate crime. What is behind the thought and rejection of that, right? I think that makes me wonder and also concerned more, because that can make one person's racism becoming systemic racism.
Yeah. And when you speak of systemic racism, I've been thinking about this a lot in relation to this conversation that we're having. And I can't help but think, if I were to address this question to someone who would say that racism has nothing to do with this, I would ask why it is that folks who work in vocations, in places where they are vulnerable, are so often women and people of color. And so while we may not be able to prove or demonstrate that these victims were targeted specifically because of their race, I think we could certainly say that they were in a position where they became targets largely because of their race. And when I'd like to move forward here, because when I look at the communities that the three of us all live in and serve demographically, Eastern North Carolina is not so different than North Georgia. When I look at the racial makeup of our communities, and when I look at who is in what kind of industries, I see a whole lot in common with the place where this took place. And so, as pastors here in Eastern North Carolina, I was wondering, I wanted to ask you, but what would you say here in our place are some factors that may lead to Asian Americans or AAPI people? What may lead to them being more vulnerable, or even feeling more vulnerable in our community?
Things that make maybe Asian people somehow vulnerable might be one. I want to say it's not just about somebody, an individual who is just a bad person. That's everywhere. If you go to Korea, there are bad people. If you go to another country, there are bad people. Bad individuals are everywhere. But when it becomes a really big problem that makes the whole, let's say, Asian Americans feeling vulnerable, that might be when it is condoned. That kind of individual not just are sometimes condoned, or even silently supported, right, by those who are in important positions. If somehow Asian Americans are seeing that over and over time in many different situations, not by their own peers alone, right? By being done by their teachers or principal, or get to see it's done, more widely in the society, then I think that'll make them feel really vulnerable. That, do I really belong here? Do they really see me part of this? Or am I still, as Sonny said before, still I'm a stranger here?
Yes, there are many factors that make Asian community feel vulnerable. But just the hearing this Georgia shooting makes me and my family already vulnerable. I mean, of course, there are my own personal experiences of racism in past recent years. But just thinking about the increasing number of hate crimes against the Asian community, that makes me feel vulnerable. Whenever my wife goes to school or goes to grocery by herself, whenever my kids are not in my sight, I feel like I cannot help but be concerned, just because of a chance, just because of a possibility that they might be targeted just because they are who they are. You don't have to do anything to be targeted, but you don't have to say anything to be targeted, but just be there and you can be targeted. So that's what makes me feel vulnerable. This is not just one incident. This is not just how do I say, merely harmful behaviors and attitudes towards Asian community. And this is actually a serious act of racism that makes people feel vulnerable. Like silence is supporting this systemic racism and the racism culture. And if you are not intentionally being anti-racist, then you are basically being and supporting racism, whether you like it or not. Let me just share just a couple of things that I experienced in North Carolina. It's safe to say that I am surrounded by safe folks, relatively safe folks and good people. But there was one morning that I dropped off my kids and going back to my car, and there was a kid. I'm not sure whether it was a girl or a young boy, and who who sat behind me, Ching Chong. Not sure whether he was trying to mimic a foreign language in a way that he knows, but I cannot help but feeling very vulnerable just hearing it, and I was frozen, couldn't look back, and who said it? It's something that you never know the pain of until you experience by yourself. So I think the best stance for people or society to have regarding this matter is to take side with victims rather than take side with offenders in the name of being neutral.
You guys are both working 2 steps ahead of me this whole time and thinking this through. And so something you've already addressed part of this last question, and so I'm going to address Joseph first, but then come back to you if you have closing thoughts. But if you're still listening with us at this point in the interview, then I think we can assume that you are a person who does have some good intentions, that wants to help be a part of helping our brothers and sisters to feel part of our community, to feel like this is home, to feel like you belong. So I wanted to ask each of you, Sonny, you addressed this I think beautifully when you said take a side. Don't just be neutral, because if you're neutral, you support the system that's already there. But I wanted to ask each of you, and Joseph, I'll ask you, what are some ways that, whether we're talking about white, black, Latinx, Native American, any other ethnic or racial group, can, especially in this moment, be supportive of our Asian American communities and individuals that we see and know?
Yeah, I was thinking about what might be the best way. Sometimes good people could come around to support one another when a person is in distress. Well, certainly, I don't think it helps a lot to make, just personally, to make too much fuss out of it, to make, for me, a great deal out of it. Like, okay, so you're Asian, so we have to all come around to support you. What we need to do for you like that, because, well, somehow, as maybe Sonny mentioned before, it's a problem that is bigger than Asian American problem. So I'm reminded of a saying of Mother Teresa, when where she has been having several people coming from all different countries to India to ask her, learn from her about how do we promote peace in this world. So what do we need to do, and how can we promote what we have been doing here in India? And one answer she gave was that go back to and love your family. So I think when we think about belonging, it all the time takes more than 2 people, more than 1 people, at least 2 people, right? You cannot just belong to yourself. Well, if that is the case, it's not making any community anything, right? When we think about belonging, we need somebody we have to belong to, or we need a community that we have to be feeling belonging there. So rather than thinking that, okay, so how can we help Asian Americans or African Americans? How can you make these dark-skinned people feeling belonging here? So how can we receive them better? Might be one way to think. But another is when one doesn't belong to the other doesn't belong either. So how can we actually belong to one another? not just accepting those strangers, accepting those people who are hurting as part of us, to make them feel better, make them feel belonging here. Because a lot of times, what we hear in hate crimes is that you don't belong here, right? But also we know that those people don't have any authority and any right to say that. Belonging takes mutual part to be played there. And then as much as Asian Americans or ethnic minorities are, it's important for them to feel belonging here, belonging to the dominant, culture. Then what about also somebody, who feels that they are part of dominant culture, seeking belonging to one another, seeking belonging to Asian Americans, seeking belonging to African American. So, and that can be done certainly in grand scale. But let's start where you are. You have neighbors, and you have people you get to see on the street, and then how can we actually not make them feel belonging here? That's important though, but how can I belong to them as well?
Thank you for that. Sonny, closing thoughts?
I think the first step that we need to take as a whole community, Asian or non-Asian, we need to see racism is not just a problem of a certain minority group. Racism is a problem of any group, any person, because it hurts not only those who are directly impacted by racism, like an Asian community or African American or Latin community, but it also affects the entire society. So if we let racism persist, deny its existence, and look away from it, and thinking it is just the issue of other groups of people, not mine, you are actually contributing to making the society more hell-like rather than heaven-like. And you don't want society where you can be targeted for something that you haven't done. You don't want society that does not offer you any belonging just because how you look and how you may appear and how different you are. We all want society and community, that is beloved community, right? We can find our belonging, and we can find our family, and we can feel safe and secure in the hands of friends and members of the society, not as threat or not as potential offenders. So this is a spiritual matter, I believe, and this is a Christian matter, but at the same time a human matter, and a matter that we all, regardless of our race and ethnicity, need to pay attention to. And the first step is to be intentional in learning the reality of racism, and be active in being anti-racist. So that's my take on for now.
All right, thank you both so much for your courage and your leadership and sharing your time with us, sharing everything that you've shared with us today. Reverend Joseph Park from Pine Valley United Methodist Church in Jacksonville, Reverend Sonny Limm of Trinity United Methodist in Kinston, thank you so much.